This happened to me when I was a teenager, and this still haunts me to this day. I was babysitting for my neighbor across the street, Alice. I babysat for her often, almost every weekend, so we were very comfortable with one another and had a good routine. Rarely, Alice would have a friend sleep over, and on this particular night, that was the case. Jennifer was a first-time sleepover date, so she was a bit nervous, but I did my best to make her happy. Alice's parents left at around 6:30 p.m., setting the alarm behind them as they went. I bathed both girls and got them into bed to watch some Nickelodeon, as was our usual routine. Once the girls were happy, I went into the kitchen to grab some snacks. It was pouring rain outside, and next to the kitchen was a breakfast nook with glass doors and a series of glass windows. As I was preparing to walk back into the room, the phone rang. Alice's parents called often, so I always answered the phone. I picked up the phone and asked who it was. "Hi, how are you?" a male voice asked. "Hi, I'm doing well," I replied. "Are you calling for Jason, Alice's father?" "He isn't home, but I can take a message." "Maybe," he says to me, "maybe I'm calling to talk to you." Now, my spidey sense wasn't ringing just yet, and I figured it was a family member or a friend who was bored and wanted to chat. I politely but quickly said I had to go. The girls were calling for me to bring their snacks, so I hung up the phone. I brought Alice and Jennifer their snacks and was about to settle into the recliner chair in Alice's room when I heard the phone ring again. I hustled back into the kitchen to answer it without really thinking anything was peculiar. At least, not yet. "You know, it's rude to hang up on people, don't you?" He started off, but he wasn't angry or aggressive. It was a little hard to hear him over the thunder and rain, and both girls were calling for me to come back because they were scared of the thunder. "I'm sorry," I said. "I have to get back to the girls. Have a nice night." I heard him say something, but hung up before I could hear what he said. The phone rang again. "Don't hang up on me," he said, with anger in his voice, but I hung up again. I was getting nervous at this point. I went back in the room with the girls, and the phone rang again. At that point, Alice was asking me to not leave her again, so I didn't answer. But the phone rang again and again. Finally, 10 minutes had passed without a call, and it rang again. This time, I thought that perhaps it was Alice's parents, so I peeled myself away from the girls to go and answer the phone. "You fucking cunt. Don't you hang up on me," he screamed. "Leave me alone. If you call again, I will call the cops, you psycho," I screamed back. I hung up the phone and turned around to see Alice and Jennifer were now standing behind me. They looked terrified, so I offered to get some ice cream bars from the freezer. I went to the freezer and the phone rang again. Alice answered it. I don't know what he was saying, but I heard screaming, and Alice looked absolutely terrified. I grabbed the phone and was about to unleash on him when he said, "That's a nice pink shirt you're wearing." I hung up the phone and realized that not only was I wearing a pink shirt, but that during the second phone call I received, there was a clap of thunder that I heard on the phone at the same time I heard it in the house. It wasn't until that moment that the realization hit me. Now, I was a teenager at this point, thinking I was invincible and having no concept of my own mortality, but a higher sense of consciousness kicked in and guided my next few actions. I hit the light switch in the kitchen as it controlled most of the lights in that immediate area. I grabbed both girls, their barking dog Alex, and shoved us all into the pantry. The pantry door opened inward, so I pushed up against the shelves and shoved a giant bag of rice against the door. I then had my back against the shelf, my feet pushing against the rice to help secure the door, and I had a girl in each arm, with my hands over their mouths. I pinned the dog between my legs, and although he constantly barked, he somehow knew to stay quiet at that moment. And the alarm started sounding, and the phone started ringing. All of us were trembling, but I was determined to not cry in front of the girls. Between the alarm and the thunderstorm, I couldn't hear much. After what felt like an hour, I heard a female voice calling and asking if anyone was in the house. She was in front of the pantry and announced that she was a police officer and that it was safe to come out. She clearly knew I wasn't going to take her on her word, so she slid her badge under the door. I moved 1 foot from the bag of rice and towed her badge towards me. The police had turned the lights on, so I was able to see from the light streaming in under the pantry door that this was in fact a badge. I cautiously made my way out of the pantry, shielding the girls behind me. The female officer, Officer Wesley didn't look alarmed at all, and I quickly realized why. "It's scary when the alarms go off," she said. "But next time you need to answer the phone and let the alarm company know everything is okay, instead of hiding. Sending officers out to a house isn't a joke." I looked at her confusingly. "We didn't set off the alarm," I said, stammering, and I started to cry. "We haven't opened any doors." She looked at me with confusion and then said, "Then who made those footprints?" From the back door, the sliding glass door in the kitchen nook, to the pantry, and out of the front door were muddy footprints. In front of the pantry was a bunch of prints, as if someone had paced in front of the door for a while. The footprints led out of the front door, which was still open when the police arrived. I was hysterical, and the police called Jason and Janelle, Alice's parents, to come home from the restaurant. Within earshot, but clearly not meant for me to overhear, Officer Wesley's partner informed her that the door in the nook had been pried open. I looked out over the pool deck and could see where the trail of footprints had started from the grass and into the house. They were mostly dissolved at that point, due to the rain, but it was very clear that someone had walked from the side of Alice's house and towards the glass door. We waited for Alice's parents to come home before I left. When the police recounted the night's events, I remember thinking in passing that neither of Alice's parents looked as terrified as I thought they should have, given the events of the evening. The police walked me home and told my parents what happened. My mother and father were both very, very upset. A few extra officers patrolled the neighborhood for a few weeks, but never caught the perpetrator, nor was he ever heard from again. And I never babysat for Alice again. I was too frightened. Fast forward a few years, and Jason, Alice's father, went to prison for tax evasion, or so we were told. Years later, when I was home visiting, I ran into Jason as he was leaving the house on his motorcycle. He stopped to chat with me, and I asked him the one nagging question I had for years. "Did you really go to jail for tax evasion?" Now at that point, Jason and Janelle were divorced. She left him for her dead sister's husband, which is pretty dark, and I guess that Jason didn't feel that he needed to keep up any pretenses. He told me that, no, he was sent to prison for drug running. He regaled me with the tale of how he was caught in a high-speed chase and bragged about how he was one of the biggest dealers in the area for years, till he was busted. And then I knew. The person he was calling that night was trying to exact some sort of punishment on Jason. Maybe he was a rival dealer, or maybe Jason worked for him and had pissed him off. But that's why Jason and Janelle didn't seem as alarmed as they should have. By the grace of God and an alarm system, we were not killed that night, but I knew that Jason's actions had led to that night's events. I knew it in my gut. This haunts me to this day, and I think I helped solidify a healthy understanding of my own mortality as well as the depravity that may be within others. I'm not overly paranoid, but I'm cautious, and I think rightly so. My stupid teenage antics, for the most part, stopped dead in their tracks. When I was in high school, I was like 16. I had a friend Lisa and a second friend Zoe. Lisa had like a lot of money, and her huge house was located right next to our high school. So every time we had a break or anything, the three of us would go there, and we would also have a lot of sleepovers at her house. It was this huge rich people's house, so it was awesome to stay there. So one day, we decided to stay the night there. The three of us plus Lisa's little sister, Anna. Their mother was gone for the night. We decided to put on some PJs and watch scary movies for hours. Anna went to bed before us three, and we just stayed in the living room watching TV. At one point, the alarm goes on. It happens sometimes, so Lisa just goes to turn it off, and that was it. But then, like 10 minutes later, the alarm goes on again, and it scares us because it's not supposed to. Technically, the alarm was made to only ring when humans came by, because the house was located in the middle of the forest, so we all knew that sometimes animals would come by the house. It's happened before, so when the alarm was installed, it was calibrated for humans only, and it was the second time it rang. We started to get a little bit scared, so we went upstairs, opened the windows to look at the garden all around the house, saw nothing. We even went on the balcony in the middle of the night. Still nothing. I was alone on the balcony at some point, and the alarm went on again, and the automatic lights around the swimming pool turned on. That meant something was around the pool, and I was just above it. I got so scared I got on my knees and stayed there until my friend deactivated the alarm and the lights, and I ran inside the house. At this point, We were really scared and started thinking about what it could be. If it has to be any human, all our lights were on, so they knew where we were. We turned all the lights off and all four of us went hiding downstairs in the kitchen without our phones. I don't even know why not even one of us thought about taking at least one phone. So we were there, lights off, scared in this huge house, with windows everywhere we could look. The alarm went berserk again. Anna screamed and Lisa took her with her, reassuring her while walking to shut the alarm off, to finally turn it off once and for all. So I was in the kitchen, with Zoe only, and we were just looking all around us. The alarm was upstairs, so the two girls were far from us. At some point, we heard footsteps right behind us, like right on the other side of the wall in the garden. It was fast, not scared, just fast, like that person knew where they were going. So we just froze, waiting in the dark, and jumped when something, well, someone, it was obvious, walked by the door and window right in front of us. We think it was a he, had a light, but it was another light that allowed us to see his silhouette. So there were at least two, running around the house for about at least 20 or 30 minutes. Detail, but this door was, like I said, a windowed door, but there were Venetian blinds on it, and they were not closed, of course. We were still not moving, and the girls upstairs were so scared that they stayed there. At least it's what they told us. Suddenly, one voice, then a second one. I was unable to understand anything, but I heard it, and Zoe and I were blinded by a sudden light right at our faces. We were literally not able to move, scream, talk, or do anything. Nothing we could have done was possible. We were just frozen in fear. The light stayed there. Someone was seeing us through the blinds. Somebody was watching us being scared and was just staying there. Suddenly, we heard a hard sound on the front door, which was closed. So we didn't move at all, but I don't know what took me. It just woke me up, and I crawled to the door in front of me, the back door, closed the blinds, and just held the door in place, in case the guy on the other side tried to force it open. Honestly, I'm small and thin. My little body was probably useless here, but I did it anyway. The one at the front door was still trying to enter, Zoe still not moving. The two girls upstairs doing I don't know what, and the one just a glass window away from me started hitting it, trying to force it open. It was closed, but I just grabbed the handle and hung it there for a while. He was just hitting and trying to open the door. All of this lasted hours in my head, but I believe it was only a few seconds. At one point, the hits to the front door stopped. A few seconds later, the other one in front of me stopped as well. Then, the lights just moved fast everywhere. The alarm did nothing. Zoe and I just slept in the kitchen, and the two sisters upstairs. Nothing happened at all. It was over. The next day, Lisa's and Anna's mom came back home, and we told her everything. Got a bit yelled at because we didn't call the cops. I took it wrong at the time, but I understand now why she got upset. She called the cops, who went to see the house, and discovered footprints all around it. Some muddy footprints and marks on the front door. They said they must have kicked the door, and that was it. They told us it must have been some guys who were just doing some reconnaissance. You know when they just walk around the houses to see how to rob them? It was common in this area. There were a lot of really big and beautiful houses filled with expensive things. The only thing I will never be able to explain is why they started being so aggressive. Originally, they were just walking around the house, but I think that if they were trying to see something or just look things up, they would have left when they realized we were inside, or at least left when that guy saw us in the kitchen. Well, they didn't. The moment they saw us in the kitchen, they didn't see the two sisters. They started being aggressive and trying to force the doors to enter the house where we were. I don't know if they really wanted to rob the house. I will never, and honestly, I don't want to know. I didn't spend any more nights at this house. I was so scared that they would come back again that I couldn't sleep there. Lisa was a bit mad, like she didn't understand, but from what she told Zoe and me, she didn't see them. She just stayed upstairs with her sister. I understand it, but I wasn't able to stand the fact that she couldn't understand how scared I was as well. I am in my 20s, and my partner just asked me what my cousin is like, since they have only met briefly. I told him some fun stories from our childhood, and then tried to find some words to describe her character. And one of the first ones was paranoid. But then I stopped to ask myself why I think of her as paranoid, and I suddenly remembered a childhood memory I had completely forgotten. When I was about 10 and she was about 12, I visited her house for a sleepover. I arrived in the early afternoon and we swapped Goosebumps books and listened to The Three Investigators, which is much more popular here in Germany than in America. We then decided to get snacks for a movie we wanted to see on TV later. Her mom, my aunt, gave us $10, so much money when you're a kid, and sent us on our way to a nearby supermarket before it got dark. The area she lived in was near a big intersection outside of the city with big chain supermarkets and department stores people only ever got to by car. We bought our candy and crossed the main road to go back to the quiet residential district. She noticed a tall man in a yellow t-shirt following us across the road. Unless he also lived in one of the few houses, a slim chance. He had no reason to be there. She told me how she saw him in the shop and how he had followed us across the street. She panicked a little and told me to walk faster. I did, even though I thought she was overreacting. After all, we were both always reading spooky stories. I was sure they must have gone to her head. He also picked up his pace and followed us for several streets before we arrived at her house and rang the doorbell, and he hurried into the other direction. I was a very naive child, and all I had ever been told about stranger danger was to not get into a car with someone who offers you candy. I was not worried in the slightest. I did not see why she was freaked out at all. When we got into bed that night, she said something like, "Now he knows where I live. I'm so scared. What if he comes here again tonight?" And I replied something like, "And does what? Murder us? Why would someone do that? He doesn't even know us." I completely forgot about the whole thing, but started thinking of her as paranoid. She probably thinks of me as naive. I must have been around 8 years old at the time this happened, and my sister was 12 or 13. We lived in a tiny little house that we called the shack, that her mom moved us into after she split up with her father. It was all we could afford. My sister and I shared a tiny bedroom, but one perk about the house was the huge backyard, with a large above-ground pool and deck that we could always play on. We had a big privacy fence, and being the nosy little kid I was, I liked to climb on some of the wooden boards of the fence and check out the neighbors. I recognized the two little boys who lived in the house kitty corner to us, because they went to my school. I made it a habit every day to climb up the side of my fence and hang around and talk to them. I never actually climbed over the fence, just climbed a plank so I was high enough to peer over and talk. They had an uncle named Randy who was probably in his 20s or 30s, and he was usually in the backyard doing housework, so I got to know him as well. Both me and my sister would hang on the fence and chat with him most days. The conversations were always innocent, and he seemed like a nice guy. Now looking back, I can see some red flags about him. I remember one time he had a basketball and accidentally threw it over our fence. We offered to grab it for him, but he insisted he could get it himself and hopped over the fence with ease. He thought nothing of it at the time, but I imagine this was to test how easily or fast he could scale the fence. One day in passing, my sister mentioned to him that our mom works the night shift, and therefore it was just the two of us alone at night in the house. That was all he needed to hear. Shortly after that, it happened. I woke up one night to the sound of my sister crying. We shared a bunk bed, me on the bottom, and when I stood up, she was out of bed, leaning against the wall on the phone crying. I asked her what was wrong, but she assured me everything was fine and to go back to sleep, so I did. It wasn't until the next day that I learned what happened. Apparently, in the middle of the night, while her mom was away at work, Randy jumped the fence and tried to break in. He started banging on her bedroom window, telling my sister to let him in. She refused, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. So he started walking around the entire house, banging on the windows, yelling for her to let him in, and trying all the doors. That's when she got out of her bed and called 911, and I woke up. Yeah, I have no idea how I managed to sleep through all that commotion, because she tells me he was banging on her window, right by the bed, loudly. But I guess you could just sleep like you're dead when you're little. Of course, by the time the cops arrived, all he had to do was jump the fence in 10 seconds, and he was back in his yard. They knocked on his door, but he denied he did it, so the police said there was nothing they could do. We were shaken up by the incident, of course. My mom wasn't able to change her work schedule, so she started having us stay at our dad's at night. A few years passed without incident, and we assumed everything was fine. I had long stopped talking to the boys next door. Then it happened again. Guess who slept through the whole thing again? My sister was a couple of years older now and had a group of her friends over for a sleepover one night. We had a sliding glass door to the backyard near where they were all sitting. The door had the typical vertical blinds, except weeks earlier one of them had broken and we couldn't get it to stay back on no matter what. So there was a gap in between the blinds where the broken one was gone. Anyway, the girls were all sitting around the couch playing board games when one of my sister's friends suddenly turned rigid. She said, "Don't freak out, but there's a guy standing at your sliding glass door." They all turned around and there was Randy again, his face pressed up to the glass where the gap in the blinds were, just watching them all. Naturally, everyone freaked out and 911 was called. Just like last time, he jumped the fence and the cops said they couldn't prove anything, even though they described what he was wearing and he answered the door in the same outfit when the police questioned him. That was the last straw, so we moved out of that house and got a restraining order against him. He didn't show up to court that day, so the judge automatically granted us the order. Never saw him again. Last I checked, I looked him up online. He's currently in prison for a bunch of random charges. Back when I was in 6th grade, I had a close-knit group of friends. There were 4 of us, and we were all girls, and we hung out all the time. Sleepovers were a norm for us, and we would usually rotate houses, seeing as all our parents knew each other and we all lived relatively close to each other, the farthest being 10 minutes away. One particular sleepover, we were at my friend Caitlin's house, and 2 of her cousins just happened to be also sleeping over. Caitlin had 2 older sisters and an older brother that were all really nice and friendly. During our sleepovers, they usually just stayed in their rooms and only came out for food, so we never really felt like we were imposing on them. Her brother would let us play with his PS2 sometimes, and her sisters would talk to us about boys and high school gossip, which, at the time, we thought was really cool. Overall, Caitlin had a great relationship with her siblings. I couldn't say the same for our cousins, though. One of her cousins was in 8th grade, and she was closer in age to one of Caitlin's older sisters, who was a freshman in high school, so she was staying in her room. The other one was a boy who was a junior in high school and naturally stayed with Caitlin's brother. The girl was nice, even if she seemed a bit shy. The guy, however, just gave me the creeps. He was definitely more outgoing, but something about his mannerisms was strange. And when he smiled, it looked like he was smiling at something he thought of in his head, and not necessarily at you. He had shoulder-length, stringy, and greasy, dirty blonde hair, and he was pretty scrawny for a guy his age. He looked like he could also be a freshman in high school. Caitlin also seemed really uncomfortable around him. Later on, when we were in Caitlin's room, she told us that she just recently met her cousins because their mom and her mom had a falling out for a few years and weren't talking to each other. They recently connected, and so they thought it would be a good idea if Caitlin's aunt and her children came to visit for a weekend. Caitlin said that her female cousin was nice enough, but that she thought the guy was weird. Ever since he got to their house, he's been trying to hang out with her instead of her brother. He would go into her room and go through her toys and books to try to make conversation with her. He was also kind of touchy. He would pet her cheeks and her hair. When she would flinch or move away from him, he would get this really cold look in his eyes and would stare at her for a few seconds before smiling that creepy smile that he does. We all agreed that it was just really weird, but eventually we moved on to other things and talked about the usual stuff 6th graders talk about. We ended up watching a movie before bed and took our turns to go to the bathroom in the hallway that Caitlin shared with one of her sisters. The oldest had her own bathroom in her room to brush our teeth. Everyone called dibs on their turn, and since I didn't really care, I was the last one to go. And my friend Lucia came back and told me she was done. I was relieved because I was getting antsy and tired and just wanted to brush my teeth, lie in bed and gossip until we fell asleep. I walked down the hallway and opened the door to the bathroom. I was so distracted that I didn't notice Caitlin's cousin in the bathroom until I turned the lights on. I quickly apologized and closed the door. At that point, I just wanted to leave and run back to the room. He was in the freaking bathroom with the lights off. From what I could see before I shut the door, he was just sitting on top of the closed toilet. Before I could leave, he opened the door, smiled at me, and told me to go on ahead. I really didn't care about brushing my teeth at that point, but I didn't want to run away and provoke a reaction out of him. I entered the bathroom and immediately locked the door behind me. I quickly brushed my teeth and did my business. This is when things got really creepy for me. I opened the door and he was still there, waiting, with a smile on his face. "Let me walk you back to your room," he said. I didn't even know what to say to that. He took my silence as a yes, I guess, because before I knew it, he grabbed my right hand and was walking with me back to Caitlin's room. His hands were really warm and sweaty, even though he didn't look like he was sweating or even remotely warm. I felt so numb and I could hear my own breathing. I honestly felt like I was going to pass out. I swear that hallway has never felt so long. When I got to the room, he let go of my hand and said goodnight, going back to the bedroom he was staying in, which we passed before we got to Caitlin's room. I walked back inside and I guess I was making a face because my friends all came up to me and asked me what was wrong. I told them what happened and they all agreed that it was super weird, and Caitlin said she would talk to her mom in the morning. I hoped that it all ended there, but it didn't. As a rule, we weren't allowed to lock doors during sleepovers. It was usually fine, but not in this instance. I had to have been sleeping for a few hours when Caitlin was shaking me to wake up. Apparently, she had been up for a while, and with me being the closest to her, I was the first one she ran to. She then told me, with her voice shaking, her cousin had opened the door to the room twice, to her knowledge, would stare in the room for almost a full minute before quietly closing the door. I was really frightened when I heard this. He was just watching us sleep throughout the night. I agreed to jump into Caitlin's bed with her and waited. It didn't even take that long when I heard the door open. We both just froze and stared straight at the door. There was no light in the hallway, and the only source of light in that room was from the moon outside. But we could still see a silhouette of someone's head peeking through the door. We could feel his eyes on us, and he was just staring into the darkness of Caitlin's room for a few seconds. We were trying not to move so that he didn't know we were awake, but it didn't matter. He let some air out of his nose as if he was trying not to laugh. "Hey, Caitlin," he whispered. And then he just closed the door. Caitlin looked like she wanted to cry. She grabbed onto me and we just held each other and waited until he decided to come back. He never did end up coming back. I guess it wasn't as fun since he knew we were awake. We never ended up going back to sleep that night though. The next morning, my mom came to get me pretty early and I said my goodbyes. I was glad Caitlin's cousin was still asleep. When I saw Caitlin in school, I asked her what happened when I left. She said that she told her mom and that her mom was really concerned and said that we should talk to their aunt. I guess she told my mom about what happened to me too because she asked me about it later on and was prying to see if anything else happened to me. After that, she made sure that Caitlin's cousins were not around before allowing me to sleep over at their place. She didn't have to worry though, because they never came to visit after that. I don't know if Caitlin's mom had another falling out with her sister or if she just never invited them back to their house.